Black girl tells Elon Musk that she is hungry. What he did next left everyone in shock. It was a bustling lunch hour at Aurora Bistro, one of the most prestigious restaurants in the heart of the city. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow on the pristine white tablecloths and polished silverware. The air was filled with the clinking of glasses, soft murmurs of conversation, and the occasional laugh from patrons dressed in tailored suits and designer dresses. Waiters moved briskly but gracefully, carrying trays laden with exquisite dishes, their movements synchronized like a well-rehearsed ballet. At a corner table, a man sat alone, quietly observing the lively scene. Elon Musk, unmistakable even in his casual attire, exuded a quiet confidence. He wore a tailored navy blazer over a simple black t-shirt. His sharp blue eyes focused on the tablet in his hands. A half-finished cappuccino sat beside him, its foam swirled into an intricate leaf pattern. Though he seemed absorbed in his reading, the faintest flicker of a smile played on his lips, as if he enjoyed being surrounded by the hum of life. Occasional whispers rippled through the restaurant as patrons noticed him. "That's Elon Musk," a young man at a nearby table murmured to his friend, excitement barely contained. "Think he's here for a business meeting?" the friend replied, trying not to stare. Across the room, the glass doors swung open and an unexpected figure entered. A young black girl, no older than 10, stepped hesitantly into the opulent space. Her name was Chloe, and she wore a faded pink sweater that hung loosely over her slight frame. Her jeans were worn at the knees, and her sneakers were scuffed and patched with tape. She held herself tightly, one hand clutching the hem of her sweater, her eyes wide with a mixture of determination and fear. Chloe's presence immediately drew attention. The lively chatter dulled as heads turned, and the restaurant's polished facade seemed to waver under the weight of collective judgment. A woman in pearls at a nearby table frowned, whispering to her companion. A waiter froze mid-step, unsure whether to approach or ignore her. Chloe hesitated near the entrance, glancing nervously at the counter where the cashier stood. Summoning her courage, she walked up to the counter, her small hands trembling. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise. I'm really hungry. Could I please have something to eat?" The cashier, a middle-aged man with a pristine uniform and a tight expression, raised an eyebrow. He didn't respond immediately, but glanced toward the manager, who stood nearby with his arms crossed. The manager's face hardened, and he shook his head subtly. Before Chloe could say more, a burly security guard stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. He towered over Chloe, his presence casting a literal and figurative shadow over her. "You don't belong here," he said gruffly, his voice carrying across the room. I just wanted some food," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. The guard snorted, his expression one of disdain. "This isn't a place for charity cases," he said loudly, his words dripping with contempt. "Out, now!" He grabbed her arm roughly and Chloe gasped, her wide brown eyes filling with tears. The restaurant fell into an uneasy silence. Some patrons exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others looked away, pretending not to notice. A couple whispered to each other, their voices tinged with disapproval, but no intention of intervening. In the corner, Elon Musk's attention snapped to the scene at the door. His sharp gaze zeroed in on Chloe's frightened face and the guard's unyielding grip. The tension in his jaw was visible as he set his tablet down with deliberate care, his movements calm but purposeful. The scraping sound of his chair as he stood up echoed through the room, drawing all eyes to him. Elon's commanding presence silenced even the faintest whispers. Patrons turned in their seats, their curiosity and anticipation mounting. With measured steps, Elon crossed the room, his every movement exuding authority. As he approached the door, the security guard noticed him and froze, his grip on Chloe, slackening. The murmurs in the restaurant grew louder, a mixture of awe and confusion rippling through the crowd. "Elon Musk is getting involved," someone whispered. "What's he doing?" another patron asked, craning their neck for a better view. Stopping a few feet away, Elon's voice cut through the room with quiet power. "Let her go." The guard turned, his face paling as he realized who had spoken. "Sir, she doesn't belong. Let her go." Elon repeated, his tone sharper. The guard quickly released Chloe's arm, taking a step back. Kneeling to Chloe's level, Elon softened his expression. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice calm and gentle. Chloe hesitated, tears spilling onto her cheeks as she whispered, "I'm just hungry." Elon's jaw tightened and he stood, turning his piercing gaze toward the manager and the guard. "You threw her out because she's hungry?" he asked, his voice sharp enough to cut through steel. The manager stammered, "Mr. Musk, we have policies. Our clientele—" "Policies?" Elon interrupted, his voice rising slightly. The entire restaurant fell silent, captivated by the unfolding scene. "Your policies are to humiliate a child who needs help?" The room buzzed with unease. A woman at a nearby table wiped a tear from her cheek, while another whispered to her companion, "I can't believe this is happening. He's standing up for her." Turning back to Chloe, Elon gave her a reassuring smile. "Come with me," he said, offering his hand. As Elon Musk guided Chloe back into the restaurant, the air grew thick with anticipation. The once lively murmur of patrons faded into silence, replaced by the weight of curiosity and unease. Elon's commanding presence seemed to alter the very atmosphere of the room. "She's my guest," Elon said, his voice calm yet firm, silencing the murmurs in the room. All eyes followed as he led Chloe through the elegant dining area, her small hand clutching his. The polished floors and opulent decor stood in stark contrast to her worn sneakers and hesitant steps. But Elon's steady presence seemed to shield her from the judgmental stares. Chloe hesitated with every step, her small, trembling hand gripping Elon's, as if afraid she might be forced out again. Her wide, nervous eyes darted across the room, meeting disapproving stares and judgmental whispers. The polished floors and opulent decor of the restaurant stood in stark contrast to her torn shoes and the dirt smudged on her cheeks. At the door, the security guard stood frozen, his earlier bravado extinguished. The manager, flustered and red-faced, stepped forward. "Mr. Musk, I assure you this was just a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice quivering under Elon's unrelenting gaze. Elon didn't bother acknowledging the man's excuses. Instead, he pulled out a chair at a table in the center of the room and gestured for Chloe to sit. "Right here," he said gently. Chloe hesitated, glancing nervously at the other patrons who continued to stare. A middle-aged woman in pearls shook her head disapprovingly, while a younger couple whispered animatedly. Despite the tension in the room, Elon's warm smile seemed to give Chloe the courage she needed. She climbed into the chair and sat, her posture timid, but her eyes filled with cautious hope. Elon straightened and turned toward the manager. "Bring her something to eat," he said firmly. "Of course, sir," the manager replied, his voice barely above a whisper as he rushed toward the kitchen. As Chloe waited, her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the tablecloth. Elon sat across from her, leaning slightly forward to meet her eye level. The room, still mostly silent, buzzed with subtle reactions. "I can't believe he brought her in," someone whispered from the corner. "Is he really going to sit with her here?" another murmured, their tone laced with disbelief. "Maybe he's just showing off," a skeptical voice suggested. Moments later, a waiter approached hesitantly, carrying a plate of steaming soup and a basket of freshly baked bread. Chloe's eyes widened as the food was placed before her. The enticing aroma seemed almost too good to be real. She looked up at Elon, seeking permission. "It's for you," he said softly, nodding. With trembling hands, Chloe reached for a piece of bread and took a small bite. The warmth of the food seemed to dissolve some of the tension in her small frame. She chewed slowly at first, then more urgently, as if the bread was the most precious thing she'd ever tasted. Elon watched her with a thoughtful expression, his own meal forgotten. "Take your time," he said gently, his voice low and reassuring. After a few bites, Chloe glanced up at him, her nervousness slowly giving way to a fragile sense of trust. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Elon nodded, his eyes softening. "You're welcome, Chloe. Can you tell me what happened? Why were you outside?" Chloe hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. She held the edge of the plate with both hands, as though grounding herself for what she was about to say. "My mom, she lost her job," she began quietly. "She started last week, but on the first day, her boss told her they couldn't keep her." She glanced up at Elon, her expression conflicted between anger and sadness. "They said they didn't want a black woman working there." Gasps rippled through the room, audible even in the restrained environment of the restaurant. A young woman seated nearby covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with shock. Chloe continued, her voice trembling. "My dad." She paused, swallowing hard. "They arrested him. He didn't do anything, but they said he looked like someone who sells drugs." Elon's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. His hands, resting on the table, curled into subtle fists as he listened. Around the room, reactions varied. "How awful," an elderly woman said softly, her voice thick with emotion. She dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "This is exactly what's wrong with the world," another patron muttered bitterly, shaking his head. "Well, we don't know the full story," someone else whispered skeptically. Chloe wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice growing steadier. "Now it's just me and my brothers. We don't have any money and my mom tries, but—" Her voice faltered. "I was just so hungry today. I couldn't wait anymore." The room fell into a stunned silence. Even those who had initially looked down on Chloe now seemed struck by the weight of her words. Some patrons avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable, while others looked visibly moved. Elon, however, remained focused on Chloe. His voice, calm but resolute, broke the silence. "You're incredibly brave," he said, his tone filled with genuine admiration. "No one should have to go through what you've been through. And no one," he paused, glancing pointedly at the surrounding staff and diners, "should ever be turned away when they need help." He turned his attention back to the manager, who had been lingering awkwardly near the kitchen. "This restaurant will feed anyone who is hungry," Elon declared, his voice steady and loud enough for everyone to hear. "No exceptions." The manager nodded quickly, his face pale. "Yes, Mr. Musk, of course." The patrons exchanged wide-eyed glances, their earlier judgments now overshadowed by awe and respect. The skepticism that had colored the room was replaced with an undeniable admiration for Elon's audacity and compassion. As Chloe took another bite of her soup, her hands shaking less now, the room seemed to collectively exhale. Elon leaned forward again, his eyes locking onto hers. "You're not alone in this, Chloe," he said firmly. "Not anymore." The other diners, though silent, couldn't help but wonder, what would this man do next? The restaurant remained eerily silent after Elon's powerful words. Everyone seemed to understand they were witnessing a moment of history in the making. Elon, standing tall and resolute, gestured to Karen and Chloe to sit at a table while he made another call, his tone calm, yet unmistakably firm. "This is Elon Musk," he said to the lawyer on the other end. "I need your team to take on a case immediately. A father has been wrongfully accused and jailed based on nothing but racial profiling. This needs to stop. I'll cover all your costs, and if needed, we'll bring this case to the highest court." Karen looked at Elon, her hands trembling. You don't have to do all this for us. We're strangers to you." Elon knelt down beside her, and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not strangers. You're part of a world I live in, and I won't stand by while injustice happens in front of me." The crowd watched in awe. Some diners began clapping softly, while others dabbed their eyes. One man muttered to his friend, "I've read about him doing big things, but seeing it happen, it's different. He's a real leader." Elon wasn't done. He turned his attention back to the restaurant manager, who still stood nervously behind the counter. "You fired her," Elon said, his voice like steel. "Why?" The manager hesitated, glancing at the crowd. It wasn't my decision alone. We didn't think she'd fit in here." "Fit in?" Elon's voice rose slightly, his intensity cutting through the room. "What you mean is you judged her because of her skin color, and you cost her family their stability because of your prejudice." The manager's face flushed with shame. Before he could stammer another excuse, Elon raised his hand to stop him. "Well, let me make this easy for you. You'll write a formal apology and reinstate her with full back pay. And if you can't do that, I'll make sure this restaurant becomes a place where everyone is treated fairly, even if I have to buy it myself." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's jaw dropped. She looked at Elon in disbelief. I don't know if I could work here again, not after what they've done." Elon nodded, his expression softening. "You shouldn't have to. But if you ever want to, the doors will be open for you. In the meantime, I'll find you something better." Just then, a man in a tailored suit stood up from the corner of the room. "Mr. Musk, I own a logistics company. I'd be honored to offer Karen a position. We need dependable people like her." Karen's eyes filled with tears. "Are you serious?" The man smiled warmly. "Completely, and it comes with health benefits." The crowd began applauding again. Karen broke down, holding her daughter close as she mouthed, "Thank you." Elon's actions seemed to ignite a spark in everyone around him. As Karen regained her composure, an older woman approached with a cane, moving slowly but with determination. She handed Karen an envelope. "This is for you," the woman said, her voice trembling. "It's not much, but I want to help." Karen opened the envelope and saw $200 inside. She tried to give it back, shaking her head. "I can't accept this. You've already done enough just by caring." "Nonsense," the woman replied. "I've lived a long life, and I know when someone needs help more than I do. Use it for your family." Meanwhile, a retired teacher at another table spoke up. "Chloe," he said gently, "I used to run after-school programs for kids your age. If you ever need tutoring or help with school, I'd love to work with you." Chloe smiled shyly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with gratitude. As the room buzzed with energy and compassion, Elon stepped aside and made another call. This time, it was to his philanthropy team. "Start preparing a press release," he instructed. "We're launching a $50 million fund to fight systemic racism and poverty. Call it the Hope Initiative. It'll provide legal aid, scholarships, and resources for families like Chloe's who are struggling because of prejudice." He paused, glancing back at Chloe, who was now chatting animatedly with the retired teacher. "And make it personal. This isn't just another project. It's about real people, real lives." His team immediately got to work. Within hours, the Hope Initiative had funding, a mission statement, and a dedicated team ready to tackle systemic issues head-on. A week later, Elon made good on his promise. He arrived at Karen's small apartment unannounced, accompanied by his assistants carrying boxes of groceries, clothes, and school supplies. Chloe and her siblings squealed with delight, rushing to hug him. Karen's husband, James, who had been released from jail just days earlier, approached Elon. His eyes were red with emotion as he extended a hand. "Mr. Musk, I don't know how to thank you," James said. "I didn't think anyone cared about people like us." Elon shook his hand firmly. "Everyone deserves justice, James. What happened to you was wrong, and I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." Karen stood nearby, watching as her children tore into the boxes of supplies. For the first time in years, her face radiated hope. Elon turned to Chloe and handed her a notebook. "This is for your dreams," he said. "Write down everything you want to do in life, big or small. One day you'll look back and realize how far you've come." As Elon left the apartment, he was met by a crowd of neighbors who had gathered outside. Word of his visit had spread quickly, and dozens of people stood on the sidewalk, clapping and cheering. One woman stepped forward, holding her infant son. "Thank you, Mr. Musk," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You've given us hope. We needed this." A young man in his 20s added, "You didn't just help one family, you reminded all of us that we can stand up for each other." Elon nodded, his expression both humble and resolute. "Change starts with moments like this," he said, "but it's up to all of us to keep it going." As the crowd erupted into applause once more, Elon climbed into his car and drove away, leaving behind a transformed family, a galvanized community, and a powerful example of how one act of kindness can ripple out to change countless lives.